Picture this. You walk into your sister's fancy in-laws mansion wearing a simple Target dress, while everyone else is dripping in designer labels. They look you up and down like you're some charity case who wandered into the wrong neighborhood. The whispers start immediately, the eye rolls, the barely concealed smirks. Your own sister stands there silent, too embarrassed to defend you. But what they don't know is that while they're living off daddy's real estate money, you've just built a $200 million tech empire from scratch. Sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one who holds all the cards. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandelier in the Morrison family's Westlake Hills mansion cast dancing shadows across the marble foyer as I stepped through the front door that Saturday evening. The sound of my Target flats against the polished floor seemed to echo louder than it should have, especially compared to the soft click of designer heels I could hear from the living room where the rest of the family had already gathered. I smoothed down my simple navy dress, the one I'd bought on sale 3 months ago, and took a deep breath before walking toward the voices. "Maya finally made it," Jessica called out as I rounded the corner, her voice carrying that particular tone she'd developed since marrying into the Morrison family. Bright and cheerful on the surface, but with an underlying current of something I couldn't quite place. Disappointment, maybe, or worse, embarrassment. The Morrison family's living room looked like something out of Architectural Digest, all cream leather sofas, Persian rugs, and family portraits in gold frames. Robert Morrison stood by the fireplace, a rocks glass of whiskey in his hand, his silver hair perfectly styled, despite being 61. He nodded at me with the kind of polite smile reserved for service workers and distant relatives. Patricia Morrison remained seated in her throne-like armchair, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she lifted her wine glass. Her eyes swept over me from head to toe in the space of 2 seconds, and I watched her lips purse almost imperceptibly. "Maya, dear," Patricia said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that made your teeth ache. "How lovely that you could join us. Though I was expecting you might bring someone along." Her gaze flickered to the empty space beside me, where a date should have been standing. "Didn't Jessica mention this was a couple's dinner?" I felt heat creep up my neck, but I kept my expression neutral. "She mentioned it, but I'm flying solo these days. Hope that's not a problem." I looked around the room, taking in the other guests. Brad's colleague Kevin Walsh sat next to his wife, both of them dressed like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. Amanda Torres, Jessica's friend since college, perched on the edge of the sofa in a dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, her husband nodding along to whatever Robert was saying about market projection. "Of course it's not a problem," Brad said, appearing at my elbow with his trademark grin that never quite reached his eyes. At 35, he still had the soft, pampered look of someone who'd never worked a day he didn't want to. His polo shirt was pressed to perfection, and his khakis had creases sharp enough to cut glass. "We just worry about you being all alone in that little apartment in East Austin. It's not exactly the safest neighborhood, is it?" "I managed just fine," I replied, accepting the glass of wine he offered. I noticed it was the house white, while everyone else seemed to be drinking something that looked significantly more expensive. "I'm sure you do," Patricia chimed in, "but wouldn't it be nice to have someone to take care of you? A woman shouldn't have to struggle on her own like that." "What is it you do again, dear?" "Something with computer graphic design," I said, sticking to the cover story I'd maintained for the past 3 years. "Freelance work. Mostly small businesses, some web design." It wasn't technically a lie. I had done graphic design work when I was building my first startup, but that was before Nexus Technologies, before the patents, before the IPO that had made me worth more than everyone in this room combined. Amanda leaned forward with the expression of someone about to deliver what she thought was helpful advice. "Oh, that's nice. Like a little hobby business." "My sister does something similar with her crafting. She sells things on Etsy." She turned to her husband. "Don't you think Maya would benefit from some networking opportunities? Maybe through the country club? The club membership fees might be a bit steep for someone in Maya's situation," Kevin's wife said with false sympathy. But they do have a lovely staff program if you're interested in catering work. I took a slow sip of my wine, tasting the cheap sulfites and wondering how these people could be so casually cruel while maintaining such pleasant expressions. Jessica caught my eye from across the room, and for a moment I thought she might say something in my defense. Instead, she looked away quickly and began fussing with the appetizer plates. "Speaking of business," Robert said, settling into his leather chair with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms, "we've been dealing with some interesting challenges at Morrison Development. All these tech companies moving to Austin, driving up commercial real estate prices. Good for business in some ways, but it's changing the character of the city. Not all change is good," Patricia added, shooting a meaningful look in my direction. "Some of these tech people have no appreciation for tradition, for the way things have always been done. They think they can just come in and disrupt everything that's worked for generations." Brad nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Just last week, we lost a major client to some AI startup. Can you believe that? Artificial intelligence like that's going to replace real human expertise in real estate development. These tech bros with their ridiculous valuations and their hoodies think they're revolutionizing everything, but most of them will be gone in 5 years." I nearly choked on my wine. Nexus Technologies had recently launched an AI platform that helped commercial developers optimize their projects through predictive analytics and market modeling. We'd been approached by several of Austin's major development firms, though I'd made sure to stay away from anything connected to the Morrison name. The irony was almost too perfect. "Maya probably doesn't know much about that world," Amanda said with a laugh. "No offense, but the tech scene is pretty exclusive. You have to have the right connections, the right education. It's not really accessible to everyone." "Where did you go to school again, Maya?" Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer and found it lacking. "UT Austin," I replied, "computer science and business double major." "Oh, a state school," Patricia said, as if I'd confessed to attending community college. "Well, that's practical, I suppose. Brad went to SMU, and then got his MBA from Northwestern. Real business education." I nodded politely, not mentioning that I'd graduated summa cum laude, or that I'd been offered full rides to MIT and Stanford but had chosen UT because I'd wanted to build something in Texas. Brad's MBA from Northwestern was impressive, I had to admit, though it was less impressive when you considered that his father had donated a new wing to their business school the year before he applied. "The thing about real business," Kevin said, warming to the topic, "is that it requires substantial capital investment, strategic thinking, long-term planning. These tech startups are just gambling with other people's money. Very few of them actually create lasting value." "Absolutely," Brad agreed. "Take all these software companies that claim they're worth billions, but don't actually produce anything tangible. It's all smoke and mirrors. When the market corrects, they'll disappear like they never exist." I wondered what Brad would think if he knew that Nexus Technologies had been profitable from year 2, that we'd never taken venture capital funding, and that our revenue had grown by 300% year over year for the past 3 years. But I just smiled and took another sip of my wine. "Maya, you must find all this business talk terribly boring," Jessica said, finally speaking up. "Why don't you tell everyone about that logo you designed for the coffee shop? That was sweet." The way she said sweet made it sound like a children's art project, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This was my sister, the person who used to stay up late with me planning our futures, who had cried when I'd gotten my first job out of college, who had been my best friend for most of my life. But ever since she'd married Brad, it was like she'd been slowly erased and replaced with this polished, apologetic version of herself, who seemed more concerned with fitting in than with standing by family. "It was for Luna Coffee on South First," I said carefully. "Small project, but the owner was happy with it." "How much do you charge for something like that?" Amanda asked with the kind of curiosity that felt more like an investigation than genuine interest. "It depends on the scope of the project," I replied vaguely. "Come on, ballpark," Brad pressed. "A few hundred? 1,000? I could see where this was going, and I didn't like it. Every project is different. "The thing is," Patricia said, leaning forward with the expression of someone about to deliver a life lesson, "while it's admirable that you're trying to support yourself, dear, There comes a time when a woman needs to think about her future more practically. You're 32 now, aren't you? The biological clock doesn't wait forever. Mother, Jessica said quietly, but there was no real force behind it. I'm just saying, Patricia continued, it might be time to consider more traditional options, find a nice man who can provide stability. There's nothing wrong with being a homemaker, it's an honorable profession, much more secure than this freelance business. Some women aren't cut out for the entrepreneurial life, Robert added helpfully. It takes a certain kind of drive, a willingness to take risks, to build something substantial. Most people are better off working for someone else, letting the real innovators handle the big decisions. The condescension in his voice was so thick I could practically taste it. Here was a man who had inherited his father's real estate business and spent 40 years doing variations of the same deals, talking to me about innovation and risk-taking. I thought about the nights I'd spent in my apartment, coding until my eyes burned, living on ramen and determination while building the first version of what would become Nexus technology. I thought about the rejection letters from investors who didn't think a 27-year-old woman with no connections could build anything worthwhile. I thought about the day we'd landed our first major client, and then the day we'd gone public, and the way my hands had shaken when I'd seen the stock price on the opening bell. Maya's always been the dreamer in the family, Jessica said, and somehow she made it sound like a character flaw. Even when we were kids, she was always working on some big project, convinced she was going to change the world. Ambition is wonderful in small doses, Patricia said with a patronizing smile, but eventually, we all have to come back to reality. Maya dear, you're a lovely girl, but you can't live in fantasy forever. The responsible thing would be to find steady employment, maybe at a nice corporation where you could get health insurance and retirement benefits. Brad might be able to put in a word for you somewhere. That's very kind, I managed, though the words felt like sand in my mouth. We could probably find something in our marketing department, Brad said magnanimously. Entry level, of course, but it would be a foot in the door. The Morrison name carries weight in this city. The Morrison name. I almost laughed out loud. If they only knew that the Morrison name had been mentioned in our boardroom just last month when one of their competitors had approached us about using our AI platform to streamline their development process. If they only knew that 3 of Austin's top real estate firms were now using software that my team had built, saving them millions in inefficiencies and planning costs. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I'm happy with my current situation. Amanda exchanged a look with Kevin's wife that was so obvious they might as well have rolled their eyes. Pride goeth before a fall, she said with false sweetness. Sometimes we need to swallow our pride and accept help when it's offered. Maya has always been stubborn, Jessica said, and there was an edge to her voice now. She never wants to admit when she needs help. Even growing up, she'd rather struggle alone than ask anyone for anything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Independence is admirable, Patricia said, but there's a difference between independence and foolish pride. At some point, Maya, you're going to have to face facts. This little freelance business isn't going to support you long term. You're not getting any younger. And the market, what did you call it? Graphic design. Well, let's just say it's not exactly a growth industry. I set down my wine glass carefully, afraid that if I held it any longer I might throw it. These people had spent the last hour systematically dissecting my life, my choices, my worth as a human being, all while maintaining the veneer of polite concern. They had no idea who I was, what I'd built, what I was capable of. To them, I was just Jessica's poor sister, the family disappointment who couldn't land a husband or a real job. You know what I think Maya's problem is, Brad said, warming to his role as amateur psychologist. She's too picky. She's waiting for some perfect guy who doesn't exist, some perfect job that's going to fall into her lap. Life doesn't work that way. Sometimes you have to settle, compromise, be realistic about your limitations, Brad, Jessica said. But again there was no real conviction in. I'm just being honest, he continued. Maya, you seem like a nice person, but you're living in a fantasy world. You can't support yourself forever on little design projects. You can't hold out forever for some imaginary perfect life. At some point, You need to grow up and join the real world. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, could hear the soft jazz music playing from the sound system, could hear my own heartbeat in my ear. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for my response, waiting to see how I'd take this final devastating assessment of my life and prospects. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my target dress, and smiled the same polite smile I'd been wearing all evening. "You know what?" I said, my voice perfectly calm. "You're absolutely right. I should be more realistic about my limitations." I picked up my purse from the coffee table. "Thank you for dinner and for the career advice. It's been incredibly enlightening." Patricia looked satisfied, like she'd successfully completed a difficult but necessary intervention. "We only want what's best for you, dear. Family has to be honest with each other." "Of course," I agreed. "Family should definitely be honest with each other." I turned to Jessica, who was looking anywhere but at me. "Jess, I'll call you later." As I walked toward the front door, I could hear them already moving on to other topics, their voices lighter now that the unpleasant business of setting me straight had been completed. Amanda was asking about plans for next weekend, Kevin was mentioning something about golf, and Patricia was discussing the upcoming charity gala at the country club. I stepped out into the humid Austin evening, breathing in the scent of mountain laurel and barbecue smoke that always seemed to hang in the air. The parking area was full of luxury cars: Brad's BMW, Kevin's Mercedes, Amanda's Range Rover, all gleaming under the landscape lighting. My 5-year-old Honda Civic looked pathetically out of place among them, like a sparrow in a flock of peacocks. As I drove back toward East Austin, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Sorry they were so intense tonight. You know they mean well." I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it without responding. 3 years ago, when Jessica had first started dating Brad, she would have been furious at anyone who talked to me that way. She would have defended me, stood up for me, told them exactly where they could stick their condescending advice. But 3 years of living in the Morrison bubble had changed her, had convinced her that their way of seeing the world was the right way, the only way. I thought about calling my parents, David and Linda Chen, who lived in a modest house in North Austin, where my father still worked as an engineering professor at UT, and my mother ran a small accounting practice. They would be supportive, would tell me I was doing the right thing by building my own path, would remind me that success wasn't measured by the size of your house or the designer labels in your closet. But I also knew they worried about the growing distance between their daughters, worried that Jessica's marriage was creating a rift in our family that might never heal. The thing was, I could have told the Morrisons exactly who I was. I could have mentioned that Nexus Technologies was my company, that the little freelance business they were so concerned about was actually a tech empire that employed 150 people and had just been valued at $200 million. I could have told them that Brad's precious Morrison Development Group was struggling to compete in a market that companies like mine were revolutionizing every day. I could have mentioned that 3 of their competitors were already using our AI platform, and that we'd been approached by firms across Texas who wanted to modernize their operations. But I hadn't built Nexus Technologies for revenge or recognition. I'd built it because I saw a problem that needed solving, because I believed technology could make commercial development smarter, more efficient, more sustainable. I'd kept my success private not out of shame, but because I'd learned early that family dynamics could become complicated when money was involved. I'd watched too many families destroyed by jealousy and resentment over financial success. The irony was that if the Morrisons had bothered to look beyond their own prejudices, if they'd taken 5 minutes to actually get to know me, instead of making assumptions based on my address and my clothing, they might have discovered that I was exactly the kind of person they claimed to respect, a successful entrepreneur who'd built something valuable from nothing, who'd taken risks and worked harder than they could imagine. But they'd been too busy performing their superiority to notice that the person they were dismissing might actually be worth knowing. They'd been so confident in their assessment of my worth, so sure that they understood the world and how it worked, that they'd never considered the possibility that their assumptions might be wrong. As I pulled into my apartment complex in East Austin, I looked up at the modest building I'd chosen specifically because it was the opposite of flashy. The rent was reasonable. The neighbors were artists and grad students and young professionals, and no one cared what kind of car you drove or where you bought your clothes. It was real in a way that the Morrison mansion, for all its marble and crystal, would never be. Tomorrow was Monday, which meant another week at Nexus Technologies, another week of building something that mattered, another week of proving that success didn't require family connections, or inherited wealth, or the approval of people who measured worth by the wrong metric. My team was brilliant, passionate, innovative, everything the Morrisons claimed to value but clearly didn't recognize when they saw it. I thought about Jessica, about the sister I'd once known who would have been proud of what I'd accomplished, who would have been excited to hear about our latest breakthrough or our newest client. I wondered if that person was still in there somewhere, buried under 3 years of country club expectations and social climbing. But mostly I thought about next Friday night when Nexus Technologies would be hosting the Austin Tech Innovation Awards at the Four Seasons downtown. It was going to be the biggest tech event of the year, with CEOs and investors and innovators from across the state. The guest list included some of the most influential people in Texas business, and there would be coverage in all the major publications. Patricia Morrison served on the board of several Austin charities, and she made it her business to attend every major social event in the city. Robert Morrison was always looking for networking opportunities, always trying to get his foot in the door with the tech community he claimed to understand so well. Brad considered himself a player in Austin's business scene, someone who should be invited to the important gathering. They would all be there, dressed in their finest, ready to schmooze with the tech elite they spent so much time dismissing, and they would have no idea that the woman they'd spent this evening condescending to, the woman they'd dismissed as a delusional freelancer with unrealistic expectations, would be standing on that stage accepting the Entrepreneur of the Year award. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't planned at all. Sometimes it was just the natural consequence of people's own assumptions catching up with them. I smiled as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, already looking forward to seeing their faces when they realized exactly how wrong they'd been about everything. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Austin feel almost bearable after months of sweltering heat. I sat in my corner office on the 15th floor of the glass tower that housed Nexus Technologies, watching the sunrise paint the downtown skyline in shades of gold and amber. The city was waking up below me, commuters streaming across the bridges that connected the east and west sides, coffee shops opening their doors, the tech corridor coming to life with the energy of innovation and possibility. My assistant Sarah Kim knocked on the glass door before entering with her usual Monday morning efficiency. At 28, Sarah was brilliant, organized, and had an MBA from Wharton that she'd earned while working nights at a startup in Philadelphia. She'd moved to Austin 2 years ago specifically to work for Nexus Technologies, drawn by our reputation for innovation and our commitment to building technology that actually solved real-world problems. "Good morning, Maya," she said, setting a steaming cup of coffee on my desk along with a tablet displaying the day's schedule. "The engineering team wants to review the latest algorithm updates at 10. You have a call with the Houston development firm at noon, and the PR team needs final approval on the press release for Friday's award ceremony." "Thanks, Sarah. How are we looking for Friday night?" I asked, scrolling through the guest list on the tablet. The Austin Tech Innovation Awards had grown from a small networking event into the premier technology gathering in Texas, and this year Nexus Technologies was not only a major sponsor but also nominated for 3 awards, including the big one, Entrepreneur of the Year. "Full house," Sarah replied with a satisfied smile. 400 guests confirmed, including CEOs from 12 of the Fortune 500 companies with Austin operations, the mayor, 3 state legislators, and half the Austin business community. "The venue looks incredible, and the catering team from the Four Seasons has outdone themselves with the menu." I nodded, still scrolling through names. Austin's tech scene was tight-knit despite its rapid growth, and most of the major players would be there. Venture capitalist from Sand Hill Road who'd flown in specifically for the event, startup founders who'd built their companies from garage projects into unicorns, established tech executives from companies like IBM and Oracle who'd made Austin their home base. "Any last-minute additions to the guest list?" I asked casually, though I already knew the answer. Sarah's attention to detail was legendary, and she'd been tracking RSVPs like a military operation. "A few stragglers from the business community," she said, consulting her own tablet. Patricia Morrison from the Morrison Foundation confirmed this morning, along with her husband Robert. Their son Brad Morrison also requested a last-minute invitation through his connection at the Austin Chamber of Commerce. I felt a slow smile spread across my face. Perfect. I'd been wondering if the Morrison family would find their way to the event, given their claims about being connected to Austin's business elite. Patricia did serve on several charity boards, and Robert's real estate company did have enough clout to merit an invitation to a major business gathering. Brad, as usual, would be riding on his family's coattail. Make sure they're seated at table 12, I said, naming the table with the best view of the main stage. I want them to have an excellent view of the evening's proceedings. Sarah raised an eyebrow slightly but made the note without comment. She'd learned not to question my occasionally specific requests about seating arrangements, trusting that I had my reason. The rest of Monday passed in the usual blur of meetings, code reviews and strategic decisions that kept Nexus Technologies running at the cutting edge of commercial AI development. Our latest platform update had reduced project planning time for our clients by an average of 37%, and the demand for our services was growing faster than we could hire qualified engineers to meet it. During lunch, I found myself thinking about Jessica. We'd been close once, sharing everything from childhood secrets to college anxieties to post-graduation dreams. She'd been the first person I'd called when I'd gotten my first job offer, the first person I'd told about my idea for what would eventually become Nexus Technology. But that was before Brad, before the Morrison family had gradually convinced her that success looked different than what we'd grown up believing. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Jessica. Hey, sorry again about Saturday. Mom's birthday is coming up next month, thinking of having dinner somewhere nice. Hope you can make it. I stared at the message for a long moment. My mother's birthday. Linda Chen, who had worked 2 jobs to put Jessica and me through college, who had celebrated every small victory in our lives like it was a major triumph, who had taught us that worth wasn't measured by bank accounts or zip code. The idea of celebrating her birthday at some expensive restaurant chosen to impress the Morrison family made my stomach turn. I typed back, "Of course I'll be there, let me know when and where," but I made a mental note to call my mother later and suggest we plan our own celebration, something that honored who she actually was, rather than who Jessica thought she needed to appear to be. Tuesday brought a series of client meetings that reminded me why I loved what I did. A commercial developer from San Antonio showed us plans for a mixed-use project that would revitalize a struggling downtown area, and our AI platform had identified opportunities for community integration and sustainable design that the traditional planning process had missed entirely. A retail chain based in Dallas was using our predictive analytics to optimize their expansion strategy, avoiding markets that conventional wisdom suggested were promising, but that our algorithms identified as oversaturated. Each meeting reinforced the same truth: technology wasn't about replacing human expertise, it was about augmenting it, giving people better tools to make better decisions. The Morrison family's dismissive comments about tech bros in hoodies disrupting traditional business showed a fundamental misunderstanding of what innovation actually meant. The best technology didn't destroy existing industries, it made them more efficient, more effective, more responsive to changing needs. Wednesday afternoon, I received an email that made me laugh out loud. Morrison Development Group had submitted an inquiry through our website, requesting information about our commercial development platform. The inquiry had been routed to our business development team, who had no idea about my personal connection to the Morrison family. The irony was delicious. Here was Brad's father's company, desperate to modernize their operations despite their public skepticism about technology, reaching out to the very company they'd dismissed as smoke and mirrors. I forwarded the email to Sarah with a note: "Please handle this personally, give them the full presentation package and schedule a demonstration for next week. Make sure they understand exactly what our platform can do for traditional real estate development." Sarah replied within minutes. "Will do. Should I mention that you'll be personally overseeing their account?" I smiled as I typed back, "Not yet. Let's see how interested they are in our smoke and mirrors first." Thursday evening, I was working late in the office when my father called. David Chen had always been a man of few words, but those words carried weight. He'd spent 40 years teaching engineering at UT, watching thousands of students discover their potential, helping them understand that innovation required both technical skill and ethical responsibility. "Maya," he said after the usual pleasantries, "your mother is worried about you and Jessica. She thinks this distance between you two is growing too wide to bridge." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Austin skyline twinkling in the darkness. Dad, I'm not the one who changed. I'm still the same person I've always been. It's Jessica who decided that wasn't good enough anymore. People grow, Maya. Sometimes they grow in directions we don't expect or understand. But that doesn't mean we give up on them. I haven't given up on her, I said quietly. But I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not just to make her more comfortable with her new life. And I'm certainly not going to let her new family treat me like a charity case while she stands there and watches. There was a long pause. My father had always been able to read between the lines, to understand the things I wasn't saying directly. What happened at that dinner, Mike? I told him about Saturday night, about the condescending comments and the career advice and the assumption that I was some kind of failure who needed to be rescued from my own poor decision. I told him about Jessica's silence, about the way she'd seemed embarrassed by my presence rather than proud of my independence. They have no idea who you really are, do they? He said finally. None whatsoever. And Jessica didn't tell them because she's ashamed of where we come from. Ashamed that her sister isn't living up to whatever standard the Morrison family has set for successful women. Maybe it's time they learned the truth. Maybe it is. Tomorrow night might be very educational for everyone involved. Friday arrived with the kind of electric energy that surrounded major events. The Four Seasons Hotel was transformed into a showcase of Austin's technological innovation, with displays from dozens of companies, networking areas buzzing with conversation, and a main ballroom that looked like something from a tech industry fairy tale. The stage was set for presentations and awards, with massive screens displaying the Nexus Technologies logo alongside the other major sponsors. I spent the afternoon in final preparations, reviewing my acceptance speech for the Entrepreneur of the Year award. Our PR team had confirmed that we were the likely winner, based on the explosive growth of our company and the impact our technology was having across multiple industries. The speech was important not just for the recognition, but for the message it would send about the future of business in Austin. As evening approached, I made my way home to my East Austin apartment to prepare for the night ahead. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a sleek black dress from a local designer, elegant but not ostentatious, professional but with enough style to command attention. I paired it with jewelry that my mother had given me for graduation, pieces that had meaning beyond their monetary value. Looking at myself in the mirror, I thought about the contrast with Saturday night's Target dress. Tonight I would be dressed appropriately for the occasion, but the difference wasn't really about the clothes. Tonight I would be stepping into my true identity rather than hiding behind a carefully constructed facade. The Four Seasons ballroom was already filled with Austin's business elite when I arrived. Venture capitalists clustered around startup founders, established executives networked with rising stars, and the energy of innovation filled the air with possibility. I moved through the crowd easily, greeting colleagues and clients, discussing industry trends and future opportunities. Maya, called out Jennifer Walsh, the CEO of a cybersecurity firm that had become one of Austin's major success stories. Congratulations on the nomination. Word is you're going to take home the big prize tonight. We'll see, I replied with a smile. The competition is impressive this year. Are you kidding? Nexus Technologies has been the story of the year. $200 million valuation, profitable from day one, technology that's actually solving real problems rather than creating new ones. You've set the standard for what sustainable tech growth looks like. As we talked, I caught sight of familiar faces entering the ballroom. The Morrison family had arrived in force, Patricia resplendent in a beaded gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, Robert distinguished in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, and Brad, looking every inch the young executive in his designer suit. They moved through the crowd with the confidence of people accustomed to being important, accepting greetings from other members of Austin's social establishment. "Excuse me for just a moment," I told Jennifer, and made my way toward the registration table where Sarah was stationed with our guest services team. "How are we doing?" I asked quietly. "Perfect execution so far," Sarah replied, checking her tablet. "The Morrison family checked in 20 minutes ago and have been directed to table 12 as requested. They seem quite impressed with the venue and the guest list. Any comments about the event?" Sarah smiled. Patricia Morrison mentioned to the registration volunteer that she was pleased to see Austin's business community finally organizing an event worthy of the city's reputation. Robert Morrison has been networking aggressively, introducing himself to several tech executives as someone who's been watching the industry's development with great interest, and has been telling anyone who will listen that Morrison Development Group is actively exploring partnerships with innovative technology companies. He seems to think this event is primarily a networking opportunity for traditional businesses to connect with the tech sector. I nodded, satisfied. The evening was proceeding exactly as I'd hoped. The cocktail hour continued with the usual mix of business discussions and social pleasantry. I found myself in conversation with Mark Stevens, the Austin Chamber of Commerce president, who had been instrumental in establishing the city as a major tech hub. "Maya, I have to ask," he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "are you planning to expand Nexus Technologies beyond Austin? I've been hearing rumors about interest from California and New York." "We're always exploring opportunities," I replied diplomatically, "but Austin will always be home base. This city gave us the foundation we needed to grow, and we believe in supporting the community that supported us." That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes companies like yours so valuable to the local economy. You're not just extracting value, you're creating it. As if summoned by our conversation about community value, Patricia Morrison appeared at my elbow. She was glowing with the satisfaction of someone who felt perfectly in her element, surrounded by Austin's power players in an elegant setting that confirmed her status as a person of importance. "Maya, dear," she said with surprise that seemed almost genuine, "how unexpected to see you here. Are you working the event? The service staff has been wonderful tonight." Mark Stevens looked confused by the comment, glancing between Patricia and me with raised eyebrows. I smiled politely and extended my hand to Patricia as if we were meeting for the first time. "Actually, I'm here as a guest," I said calmly. "Patricia Morrison, isn't it? I believe we met at your son's house last week." "Oh yes, of course," Patricia said, though her expression suggested she was still trying to understand how Jessica's struggling sister had ended up at Austin's most exclusive business event. "Are you here with someone from the industry?" "In a manner of speaking," I replied. "I work in tech myself." Mark Stevens was clearly trying to figure out the dynamic he'd stumbled into. "Maya, I don't think I've had the pleasure of meeting your friend. Patricia Morrison," I said, "serves on several charity boards here in Austin and is quite active in the social community." "Patricia, this is Mark Stevens, president of the Austin Chamber of Commerce." Patricia lit up at the introduction, immediately launching into the kind of networking conversation she excelled at. "Mr. Stevens, what a pleasure. The Morrison family has been part of Austin's business community for over 30 years. My husband Robert runs Morrison Development Group, and we've been watching the growth of the technology sector with great interest." "Morrison Development," Mark said thoughtfully. "Yes, I know the company. Traditional commercial real estate, if I remember correctly." "How are you adapting to the changes in the market?" "Oh, we're very forward-thinking," Patricia assured him. "In fact, Robert has been actively researching partnerships with technology companies. We believe in embracing innovation while maintaining the standards and traditions that have made Austin great." I listened to this conversation with growing amusement. Patricia had no idea that she was describing exactly the kind of evolution that companies like Nexus Technologies were making possible, or that her husband's company had literally reached out to us for help with that very transformation. "That's wise," Mark agreed. "The companies that are thriving in today's market are the ones that understand how to blend traditional expertise with technological innovation." Maya here is a perfect example of that kind of thinking. Patricia turned to me with polite interest, clearly expecting me to elaborate on whatever minor role I played in the tech industry. "Oh, what do you do in technology, dear?" Before I could answer, Sarah appeared at my shoulder with perfect time. "Maya, I'm sorry to interrupt, but they're ready for you backstage. The presentation is starting in 10 minutes. Patricia looked confused by this exchange, while Mark Stevens nodded approvingly. "Maya, congratulations again on the nomination. Patricia, you're in for a treat tonight. Some of Austin's most innovative minds are being recognized." As Sarah and I headed toward the backstage area, I could hear Patricia asking Mark Stevens something in a puzzled tone, but her words were lost in the growing excitement as guests began moving toward their tables for the formal presentation. Backstage, the energy was electric. The other nominees for Entrepreneur of the Year were there, each of them representing companies that had contributed to Austin's reputation as a major tech hub. There was David Park from the fintech startup that had revolutionized small business lending, Sarah Chen from the biotech company developing new cancer treatments, and Michael Rodriguez from the clean energy firm that was making solar power accessible to underserved communities. "Maya," said David, "I have to admit, if I don't win tonight, I'm rooting for you. Nexus Technologies has been the gold standard for sustainable growth in this industry." "Thanks, David. Honestly, just being nominated alongside companies like yours feels like a victory already." The event coordinator, a efficient woman named Lisa who'd been managing Austin's major business events for over a decade, clapped her hands for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're starting in 5 minutes. Maya, you're presenting the award for innovation in artificial intelligence first, then we'll move through the other categories before finishing with Entrepreneur of the Year." I nodded, checking my notes for the AI innovation presentation. It was fitting that I'd be presenting this particular award, given that artificial intelligence was the foundation of Nexus Technologies' platform. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd be standing on stage talking about the transformative power of AI, while the Morrison family sat in the audience, still convinced that artificial intelligence was nothing more than a tech industry fad. "Maya," Lisa continued, "your intro for tonight will mention that you're the founder and CEO of Nexus Technologies, along with the company's recent achievements. The teleprompter has been updated with your full biography." "Perfect," I said, feeling the familiar calm that came before major presentations. I'd given hundreds of talks over the years, from small investor meetings to major industry conferences, but tonight felt different. Tonight wasn't just about business or recognition, it was about truth finally coming to light. The lights dimmed in the ballroom, and I could hear the murmur of 400 guests settling into their seats. Through the curtain I could see the massive screens displaying the evening's agenda, with the Nexus Technologies logo prominently featured as both a major sponsor and a nominee for the top award. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcer's voice over the sound system, "please welcome to the stage the founder and CEO of Nexus Technologies, Maya Chen." I stepped into the spotlight, and for a moment, the ballroom was absolutely silent. Then the applause began, warm and sustained, the kind of recognition reserved for people who had earned their place on that stage through achievement rather than connections. As my eyes adjusted to the stage lights, I could see the audience clearly. Austin's business elite, venture capitalist, tech executives, startup founders, all looking toward the stage with the attention that major industry events commanded. And there, at table 12, exactly where I'd requested they be seated, sat the Morrison family. Patricia's mouth was slightly open in an expression of complete shock. Robert was leaning forward in his chair as if he needed to confirm what he was seeing. Brad looked like he'd been hit with a physical blow, his face pale and his eyes wide with disbelief. But it was Jessica's expression that hit me the hardest. My sister was staring at the stage with a mixture of shock, pride, confusion, and what might have been regret. She was seeing me clearly for the first time in years, seeing not the struggling freelancer that the Morrison family had convinced her I was, but the successful entrepreneur I'd actually become. I smiled at the audience, letting the moment settle, letting the recognition sink in. Then I began to speak about innovation, about the power of artificial intelligence to transform traditional industries, about the responsibility that came with building technology that could change how business was done. But really, I was speaking about truth, about the danger of assumptions, about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to understand what people were really capable of achieving. The evening had only just begun, and already everything had changed forever. The presentation went flawlessly. I spoke about the evolution of artificial intelligence in commercial development, about how machine learning algorithms could optimize everything from site selection to resource allocation, about the responsibility that came with building technology that could fundamentally change how business was conducted. The audience was engaged, asking thoughtful questions about implementation and scalability, about the ethical considerations of AI-driven decision-making. But throughout the entire presentation, I was acutely aware of Table 12. Patricia Morrison sat rigid in her chair, her champagne glass untouched, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and what might have been the beginning of panic. Robert had pulled out his phone and was frantically typing, probably trying to verify what he was seeing and hearing. Brad looked like he was having an existential crisis, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something approaching terror, and Jessica was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, as she watched her sister command the attention of 400 of Austin's most influential business leaders. I wondered what she was thinking, whether she was proud or ashamed or simply overwhelmed by the realization of how wrong they'd all been. After the AI Innovation Award was presented to a brilliant team from a startup developing autonomous vehicle technology, I made my way backstage to prepare for the rest of the evening. The other presenters and nominees were buzzing with the energy that came from being part of something significant, something that would be talked about in Austin business circles for months to come. "Maya, that was an incredible presentation," said Sarah Chin, the biotech CEO. "You made AI accessible without dumbing it down. That's a rare skill." "Thanks, Sarah. I've learned that the key to explaining complex technology is focusing on the problems it solves, rather than the mechanisms it uses." As we waited for the next segment of the program, I found myself thinking about the conversation I'd had with my father the night before. He'd asked whether it was time for the Morrison family to learn the truth, and I'd agreed that it might. But standing backstage, having just revealed myself to 400 people including the family that had spent last Saturday evening systematically dismantling my character, I realized that I hadn't fully considered what would come next. The truth was, I'd built Nexus Technologies, not for revenge or recognition, but because I saw problems that needed solving and had the skills and vision to solve them. The success that followed had been gratifying, certainly, but it had never been the primary motivation. I'd kept my achievements private not out of shame or fear, but because I'd learned that family dynamics could become complicated when success and money entered the equation. But the Morrison family's behavior on Saturday night had crossed a line. It wasn't just that they'd been condescending or dismissive, it was that they'd done it with such casual cruelty, such absolute certainty that they understood the world and my place in it. They'd attacked not just my current situation, but my character, my judgment, my worth as a human being, and they'd done it while my sister stood by and said nothing. The event coordinator appeared at my elbow. "Maya, we're ready for the next segment. You can watch from the wings if you'd like, or there's a VIP reception area set up backstage for nominees and presenters." I chose to watch from the wings, curious to see how the Morrison family was handling the revelation. The next few awards were presented by other industry leaders, recognizing achievements in cybersecurity, clean energy, and educational technology. Each presentation reinforced the same themes: innovation, collaboration, the responsibility that came with building technology that could change people's lives. During a brief intermission, I saw Robert Morrison stand up from table 12 and head toward the lobby, his phone pressed to his ear. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language suggested urgency, possibly even panic. He was probably trying to reach someone at Morrison Development Group, trying to understand how they'd ended up submitting an inquiry to the very company whose founder they'd spent Saturday evening insulting. Patricia remained at the table, but I could see her leaning across to speak urgently with the other guests at their table. She was probably trying to do damage control, to explain to the other prominent Austin families seated nearby that she had no idea who I really was, that the Morrison family had been caught completely off guard by this revelation. Brad was nowhere to be seen. He'd disappeared sometime during the cybersecurity presentation, and I wondered if he'd simply left the event altogether. For someone who prided himself on being connected to Austin's business community, learning that he'd spent an evening mocking one of the city's most successful young entrepreneurs had to be devastating to his self-image. But it was Jessica who concerned me most. She was still seated at table 12, but she'd turned her chair slightly away from the other guests and was staring down at her hand. Even from a distance I could see that she was struggling, probably trying to process not just the revelation of my success, but the implications of her own behavior and silence. The intermission ended, and the program resumed with awards for emerging technologies and breakthrough innovation. Each presentation was a reminder of Austin's growing importance as a tech hub, of the way the city was attracting and nurturing the kind of talent that could build world-changing companies. During the award for breakthrough innovation, presented to a team that had developed revolutionary water purification technology, I found myself thinking about the broader implications of what was happening tonight. The Morrison family had always represented a certain type of Austin elite, traditional, established, connected to the old power structures that had dominated the city for generations. They weren't evil people, but they were people who had become comfortable with their assumptions about how the world worked and who deserved respect within it. My success challenged those assumptions. I was a young woman from a middle-class family, the daughter of immigrants who had built their lives around education and hard work rather than connections and inherited wealth. I'd succeeded in an industry that the traditional business establishment still viewed with skepticism, building something valuable without asking permission or following the established rules. The conflict between Jessica and me wasn't really about sibling rivalry or family dynamic. It was about two different visions of success, two different ways of moving through the world. Jessica had chosen to marry into the established system, to gain status and security by aligning herself with people who already had both. I'd chosen to build something new, to create value rather than inherit it, to earn respect rather than assume it. Neither choice was inherently wrong, but they were incompatible in ways that we'd both been too polite or too afraid to acknowledge. Jessica couldn't simultaneously be proud of my unconventional success and comfortable with her in-laws' dismissal of everything I represented. She'd been forced to choose, and she'd chosen. As the evening progressed toward the main event, the Entrepreneur of the Year award, I could feel the energy in the ballroom building. This was what everyone had come to see, the recognition of the person who had most exemplified the spirit of innovation and leadership that was making Austin a major force in the national economy. I was confident that Nexus Technologies would win. Our growth had been unprecedented, our technology was genuinely revolutionary, and our impact on the commercial development industry was already being felt across multiple states. But more than that, our story embodied the values that Austin's business community wanted to celebrate: bootstrap entrepreneurship, technological innovation applied to real-world problems, sustainable growth that benefited the entire ecosystem. Sarah Kim appeared at my side with a final briefing. Maya, they'll be announcing the Entrepreneur of the Year award in about 10 minutes. You're seated at the head table for dinner afterward, and there's a brief press conference scheduled for 9:30 with the Business Journal and the tech publications. How are our guests handling the evening? I asked quietly. Sarah glanced toward table 12 and suppressed a smile. Quite a lot of animated discussion. Patricia Morrison has been fielding questions from other guests about her connection to you, and she seems to be having difficulty explaining the situation. Robert Morrison returned from his phone calls looking rather pale. Jessica Morrison hasn't moved from her seat, but several people have approached her to offer congratulations on her sister's success. And Brad left during the clean energy presentation. According to the registration desk, he claimed he had a family emergency. I nodded, unsurprised. Brad had probably realized that remaining at the event would mean facing a series of uncomfortable conversations with people who had heard him dismiss the tech industry as smoke and mirror. Better to disappear and try to manage the damage privately than to endure public humiliation. The lights dimmed again, and the announcer's voice filled the ballroom with the kind of gravitas reserved for the evening's climactic moment. Ladies and gentlemen, we come now to the evening's most prestigious recognition, the Austin Tech Innovation Award for Entrepreneur of the Year. This award recognizes the individual who has most exemplified the spirit of innovation, leadership and community impact that defines Austin's technology sector. The screen above the stage displayed the profiles of the 5 nominees, each representing a different aspect of Austin's diverse tech ecosystem: the fintech founder who had democratized small business lending, the biotech CEO who was developing breakthrough cancer treatment, the clean energy entrepreneur who was making solar power accessible to underserved communities, the cybersecurity expert who was protecting critical infrastructure from emerging threats, and Nexus Technologies, the AI platform that was revolutionizing commercial development. The winner of this year's Entrepreneur of the Year award, the announcer continued, founded her company 5 years ago with a vision of using artificial intelligence to make commercial development more efficient, more sustainable and more responsive to community needs. Under her leadership, the company has grown from a one-person startup to a major force in the industry, serving clients across Texas and beyond while maintaining profitability and sustainable growth practices. I could feel my heart rate increasing, the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that came before major moments. Around me, the other nominees were maintaining their composed expressions, but I could sense the tension. Her company recently completed a successful public offering, reaching a valuation of $200 million while maintaining its commitment to innovation and community impact. She has been recognized not just for her business success, but for her leadership in promoting diversity and inclusion in the tech industry, and for her commitment to using technology as a force for positive change. Through the stage lights I could see the Morrison family table clearly. Patricia was gripping her champagne glass so tightly her knuckles were white. Robert had returned to his seat, but looked like he was preparing for bad news. Jessica was watching the stage with an expression I couldn't quite read. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's Austin Tech Innovation Award for Entrepreneur of the Year goes to Maya Chen, founder and CEO of Nexus Technology. The applause was thunderous, the kind of sustained ovation that acknowledged not just individual achievement, but collective pride in what Austin's tech community was accomplishing. I stood up from my seat at the head table, smoothing down my black dress, and made my way to the stage with as much composure as I could manage. As I walked toward the podium, I caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Jennifer Walsh from the cybersecurity firm was applauding enthusiastically. Mark Stevens from the Chamber of Commerce was beaming with pride. Venture capitalists who had initially passed on investing in Nexus Technologies were applauding politely, probably wondering if they'd made a mistake. And at table 12, the Morrison family was experiencing what could only be described as a collective reckoning. Patricia Morrison looked like she was watching her entire worldview crumble in real time. The woman she had dismissed as a delusional freelancer with unrealistic expectations was standing on stage, accepting the most prestigious business award in Austin. The little computer hobby she had mocked was actually a company worth more than Morrison Development Group and most of the other businesses represented in the ballroom. Robert Morrison was staring at the stage with the expression of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. His company had literally reached out to Nexus Technologies for help modernizing their operations, which meant that the woman he had lectured about the realities of business was someone he needed as a client and partner. But it was Jessica's reaction that affected me most profoundly. My sister was crying again, but this time her tears seemed to be a mixture of pride, shame, and regret. She was finally seeing me clearly, seeing not the person the Morrison family had convinced her I was, but the person I had actually become. And I could see in her expression that she was beginning to understand what her silence had cost us both. I reached the podium and looked out at the audience, at 400 of Austin's most influential business leaders, who were applauding not just my individual success, but what it represented for the city's growing reputation as a center of innovation and entrepreneurship. "Thank you," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "When I started Nexus Technologies 5 years ago in my East Austin apartment, I had a simple goal: to use artificial intelligence to solve real problems for real people. I believed that technology should make business more efficient, more sustainable, and more responsive to community needs." As I spoke, I could see the Morrison family clearly. Patricia was struggling to maintain her composed expression, but her hands were trembling slightly. Robert was leaning forward as if he needed to hear every word, probably trying to reconcile the woman on stage with the person he had dismissed as naive and unrealistic. "Building a successful company requires more than just good technology," I continued. "It requires understanding your market, respecting your clients, and recognizing that innovation comes from collaboration, not isolation. It requires humility about what you don't know, and confidence in what you do know." I paused, letting those words sink in. In the context of a business speech, they sounded like standard entrepreneurial wisdom, but I knew that at least 3 people in the audience would understand their deeper meaning. "Most importantly," I said, "it requires remembering that success isn't just about financial returns or industry recognition. It's about building something that makes a positive difference, something that creates value for others, something that contributes to the community that supports you. The applause that followed was warm and sustained, the kind of response that acknowledged not just business success but leadership and vision. As I held up the Crystal Award, I could see camera flashes throughout the ballroom, capturing the moment for the business publications that would cover the event. But I was mostly watching Table 12, where 3 people were coming to terms with the fact that they had fundamentally misjudged someone they thought they understood completely. As I left the stage and made my way back to the head table, I was intercepted by a steady stream of congratulations. Fellow entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, potential clients, and business leaders who wanted to connect with Austin's newest recipient of the city's most prestigious business award. "Maya, congratulations," said David Park from the fintech startup. "That speech was perfect. You managed to be gracious without being modest, confident without being arrogant." "Thanks, David. It's an honor to be recognized alongside entrepreneurs like you, who are building companies that actually matter." As I moved through the crowd accepting congratulations and business cards, I became aware of a commotion near Table 12. Patricia Morrison had stood up and was speaking urgently with Jessica, gesturing toward the stage with obvious agitation. Other guests at nearby tables were watching with the polite interest that wealthy people reserved for other people's family drama. Robert Morrison was still seated, but he was on his phone again, probably trying to reach someone at his company who could explain how they had ended up soliciting services from the very person they had insulted. The irony was almost too perfect. Morrison Development Group needed Nexus Technologies more than Nexus Technologies needed Morrison Development Group. "Maya," said a voice behind me, and I turned to see Jennifer Walsh approaching with a concerned expression. "I don't want to intrude, but there seems to be some kind of situation at one of the guest tables. The woman in the beaded gown has been asking several people about your background, and she seems quite distressed." I glanced toward Table 12, where Patricia was now engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with Mark Stevens from the Chamber of Commerce. Her face was flushed, and her carefully composed demeanor was showing obvious cracks. "It's fine, Jennifer," I said calmly. "Just some family dynamics that needed to be clarified." Jennifer raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details. In Austin's business community, successful entrepreneurs were afforded a certain amount of privacy regarding their personal lives, especially when it came to family complications. The formal portion of the evening was winding down, but the networking and socializing would continue for at least another hour. The head table where I was seated offered an excellent view of the entire ballroom, and I found myself watching the Morrison family with fascination as they struggled to process what they had learned. Patricia had returned to her seat, but she kept glancing toward the head table with an expression that mixed shock, embarrassment, and what might have been calculation. She was probably trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, how to transform her relationship with Jessica's sister from condescending disapproval to strategic alliance. Robert had finished his phone calls and was now speaking quietly with the other businessmen at his table, probably trying to gauge whether his humiliation was public knowledge or contained to his immediate family. Given that Austin's business community was relatively small and gossip traveled quickly, he was likely fighting a losing battle. But Jessica remained the most compelling figure at Table 12. She had turned her chair to face the head table directly, and she was watching me with an intensity that was both touching and heartbreaking. For the first time in 3 years, she was seeing her sister clearly without the filter of Morrison family expectations and assumptions. I could see her trying to reconcile the successful entrepreneur on stage with the struggling freelancer she thought she'd been protecting and pitying. She was probably remembering conversations we'd had before before the Morrison family had convinced her that success looked different than what we'd grown up believing. As dessert was served and the evening moved into its final phase, I made a decision that surprised even me. I stood up from the head table, picked up my award, and walked across the ballroom toward Table 12. The conversation at the Morrison table stopped abruptly as I approached. Patricia looked up at me with an expression that was attempting to be welcoming but couldn't quite hide her underlying panic. Robert stood up with the automatic politeness of someone who had been raised to show respect to successful business people, even when those people had recently delivered devastating blows to his ego. "Maya, Patricia said, her voice pitched higher than usual. Congratulations on your award. What an extraordinary achievement. Thank you, I replied, setting my crystal award on the table where everyone could see it clearly. I hope you've enjoyed the evening. Austin's tech community really came together to make this a special event. Absolutely, Robert said, extending his hand for a handshake that was probably the most genuine gesture he'd made toward me since we'd met. I have to admit, we had no idea about your accomplishments. Oh, would you? I said with a slight smile. I don't make a habit of discussing business at family dinners. Patricia's face flushed deeper. Of course not. Family time should be separate from professional achievements. We completely understand. The other guests at table 12 were watching this exchange with obvious fascination. They had probably pieced together enough of the situation to understand that some kind of dramatic reversal was taking place, but they were too polite to ask direct questions. Jessica, I said, turning to my sister who had been silent throughout this exchange, could I speak with you privately for a moment? Jessica nodded and stood up, her movements careful and deliberate. We walked together toward a quieter area near the windows that overlooked downtown Austin, where the city lights created a backdrop of twinkling possibilities. Maya, Jessica said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. I had no idea that Nexus Technologies was yours. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at my sister, at the woman who had once been my closest friend and confidant, who had shared my dreams and supported my ambitions, who had believed that anything was possible if you worked hard enough and stayed true to your values. Because I knew this would happen, I said gently. I knew that once money and success entered the equation, everything would change. I hoped I was wrong, but Saturday night proved that I wasn't. Jessica's eyes filled with tears again. They don't represent who I really am. I know how it looked, but I was trying to keep the peace, trying to avoid conflict, by letting them tear me apart, by standing there silent while they dismissed everything I'd worked for as delusion and failure. I was wrong, Jessica whispered. I was so wrong, and I'm so sorry. I let them convince me that their way of seeing the world was the only way, that success had to look like what they expected it to look like. I studied my sister's face, seeing genuine remorse, but also the deeper problem that couldn't be solved with apology. The question isn't whether you were wrong, Jess. The question is what you're going to do now that you know the truth. Before Jessica could answer, we were interrupted by the approach of Patricia Morrison, who had apparently decided that damage control required immediate action. Maya, dear, Patricia said, her voice now dripping with a sweetness that was almost aggressive in its intensity. I hope you'll forgive our confusion earlier. We simply had no idea about your remarkable success. Robert and I would love to learn more about your company and explore potential collaborations. I looked at Patricia with the same polite smile I'd worn through Saturday night's dinner, but now the power dynamic was completely reversed. Now she needed something from me. And we both knew. That's very kind of you, Patricia, I said calmly. As it happens, your husband's company recently reached out to Nexus Technologies about our commercial development platform. I'm sure our business development team will be in touch to schedule a presentation. Patricia's smile faltered slightly as she processed the implications. Morrison Development Group had approached Nexus Technologies for help, which meant they were supplicants rather than potential partners. The woman they had dismissed as a failed freelancer was now someone they needed to court professionally. Wonderful, Patricia managed. I'm sure Robert is very interested in exploring innovative approaches to the business. Innovation can be challenging for established companies. I agree. It requires admitting that traditional approaches might not be sufficient for modern markets. Not everyone is comfortable with that level of change. The message was clear, and Patricia received it with the grace of someone who had spent decades navigating Austin's social hierarchy. She had underestimated me catastrophically, and now she was paying the price for that error in judgment. Of course, she said stiffly. Well, I should let you return to your celebration. Again, congratulations on your achievement. As Patricia retreated to table 12, Jessica and I stood together in silence, watching the city lights twinkle beyond the windows. Austin was changing, growing, becoming something new and dynamic that honored its past while embracing its future. The question was whether the people who lived here could change along with it. Maya, Jessica said finally, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but is there any chance we can fix what I've broken? I turned to face my sister, seeing in her expression the woman I'd once known, the person who had believed in possibility and worked for her dreams rather than inheriting them. I don't know, Jess, I said honestly, but I know it won't happen as long as you're more concerned with what the Morrison family thinks than with what's actually true. The evening was winding down around us, but I knew that for the Morrison family, the real reckoning was just beginning. They had built their sense of superiority on assumptions that had just been shattered completely, and they would have to decide whether to learn from this experience or double down on their prejudices. As for Jessica and me, that remained to be seen, but for the first time in 3 years, I had hoped that the sister I'd once known might still be in there somewhere, waiting to remember who she really was. The weeks following the Austin Tech Innovation Awards ceremony brought a series of consequences that rippled through both my professional and personal life in ways I hadn't entirely anticipated. The business world moved quickly to embrace what the Austin Business Journal called the most dramatic revelation in recent Austin business history, but the personal ramifications proved far more complex and lasting. The Monday morning after the awards ceremony, I arrived at Nexus Technologies to find our reception area buzzing with activity. Sarah Kim met me at the elevator with a tablet full of messages, interview requests and business inquiries that had flooded in over the weekend. Maya, it's been incredible, she said, her eyes bright with excitement. The phone hasn't stopped ringing since Saturday night. We've had inquiries from development firms in Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and even Phoenix and Denver. The Austin Business Journal wants an exclusive interview. TechCrunch is asking for a feature story, and Forbes is interested in including you in their upcoming Entrepreneurs to Watch issue. I scrolled through the messages as we walked toward my office, noting names from companies I'd been trying to reach for months. Success had a way of opening doors that had previously remained stubbornly closed, and apparently, winning Austin's most prestigious business award carried more weight than I'd realized. What about Morrison Development Group? I asked, curious about how Robert Morrison was handling his company's awkward position. Sarah's smile turned slightly mischievous. Interesting you should ask. Robert Morrison called personally at 8:30 this morning, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss potential partnership opportunity. His exact words were that Morrison Development Group was very interested in exploring innovative technological solutions, and that he hoped we could move forward expeditiously. The irony was real. Less than a week ago, Robert Morrison had been lecturing me about the realities of business and the dangers of unrealistic expectations. Now he was calling my company before business hours, desperate to secure a meeting with the woman he'd dismissed as naive and delusional. Schedule the meeting for Thursday afternoon, I decided. Full presentation, our standard partnership package, and make sure the conference room has a clear view of the city. I want him to see exactly what we've built here. Over the next few days, the story of the awards ceremony, revelations spread through Austin's business community with the velocity that only the most dramatic gossip could achieve. The narrative was irresistible. The successful entrepreneur who had been hiding in plain sight, the prestigious family who had humiliated someone far more accomplished than themselves, the sister caught between two worlds with incompatible values. The coverage was generally favorable to me, with most publications framing the story as an inspiring example of entrepreneurial success transcending social prejudice. The Austin Business Journal ran a lengthy profile titled "The Quiet Revolutionary: How Maya Chen Built Austin's Next Tech Empire While No One Was Watching." The piece detailed Nexus Technologies' growth, my educational background, and our impact on the commercial development industry. But it was the personal angle that captured the public imagination. The story of the family dinner where I'd been systematically humiliated, only to be revealed days later as one of Austin's most successful young entrepreneurs, resonated with anyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed based on appearance. Wednesday evening, my father called with news that was both expected and troubling. "Maya, I thought you should know that your mother received a call from Patricia Morrison today. She was very apologetic about the misunderstanding at dinner, and wanted to invite our entire family to a gathering at their country club next weekend. I leaned back in my desk chair watching the sunset paint the Austin skyline in shades of gold and crimson. Let me guess. She suddenly realizes that having the Chen family as friends might be socially advantageous. Your mother was polite, but declined the invitation. She told Patricia that our family prefers smaller, more intimate gatherings where people can have genuine conversations. I smiled at that. Linda Chen had never been impressed by social climbing or status displays, and she had a gift for delivering rejection with such grace that it took people a moment to realize they'd been turned down. How is Mom handling all this publicity? She's proud of you, of course, but worried about Jessica. Your sister has been calling every day asking if we've heard from you, wanting to know if there's anything she can do to repair the relationship. The question of Jessica had been weighing on my mind since our conversation at the awards ceremony. I could see that she was genuinely remorseful, that she understood the magnitude of her mistake in staying silent while the Morrison family attacked my character and choices. But I also knew that understanding a mistake and being willing to face its consequences were two different things. Thursday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Austin feel like the perfect place to build a life and a business. I dressed carefully for the Morrison Development Group meeting, choosing a charcoal gray suit that was professional but unmistakably expensive, a subtle reminder that the power dynamic had shifted permanently. Robert Morrison arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Brad and a third man I didn't recognize who was introduced as their head of operations. Robert's demeanor was completely different from the confident patriarch who had lectured me about business realities the previous Saturday. He was deferential, almost nervous, clearly uncomfortable with his new position as supplicant rather than advisor. Maya, thank you for making time to see us, he began, his voice carrying none of the casual authority I remembered from the dinner party. I want to start by acknowledging that we got off on the wrong foot last weekend. We clearly didn't understand your background or your accomplishments. Brad remained silent throughout his father's opening remarks, his usual cockiness replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. He kept glancing around the Nexus Technologies conference room, taking in the sophisticated technology displays, the awards and recognition plaques, the panoramic view of downtown Austin that spoke to our success and prominence. We're here because Morrison Development Group recognizes that we need to modernize our operations. Robert continued, the commercial development industry is changing rapidly, and companies that don't embrace technological innovation risk being left behind. I listened to his presentation with professional interest, noting how carefully he was choosing his words. This was a man who had spent decades being the smartest person in most rooms, dispensing wisdom, and making decisions with the confidence that came from inherited authority. Now he was admitting that his expertise was insufficient, that he needed help from someone he had recently dismissed as unrealistic and naive. Our research indicates that Nexus Technologies has developed the most sophisticated AI platform for commercial development optimization in the regional market, the operations manager added. We're particularly interested in your predictive analytics capabilities and your integration with existing project management systems. The presentation continued for 45 minutes, with the Morrison Development Group team outlining their company's challenges, their growth objectives, and their recognition that traditional approaches were no longer sufficient for competing in the modern market. It was a thorough professional proposal that would have been compelling if not for the personal history underlying the business relationship. When they finished, I leaned back in my chair and considered my response. Nexus Technologies could certainly help Morrison Development Group modernize their operations, and from a purely business perspective they would be a valuable client. Their projects were substantial, their reputation was solid, and their willingness to embrace technological change suggested a partnership that could be mutually beneficial. But business decisions weren't made in a vacuum, and the personal dynamics couldn't be ignored entirely. Your presentation is impressive, I said finally. Morrison Development Group clearly has the scale and ambition to benefit significantly from our platform. However, I want to be transparent about my concern. Robert Morrison's face tightened slightly, probably anticipating rejection or conditions that would be difficult to accept. Successful technology partnerships require trust, communication, and mutual respect, I continued. They require clients who understand that innovation often challenges conventional wisdom, who are willing to question assumptions and embrace new approaches to solving old problems. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly understanding that I was referring to his dismissive comments about tech companies and artificial intelligence. Last Saturday evening, I heard several comments from your family about the tech industry that suggest a fundamental skepticism about the value of innovation and the people who pursue it. I need to understand whether those comments reflect your company's actual attitude toward technological partnerships. The silence that followed was profound. Robert Morrison was being forced to choose between defending his family's behavior and securing a business relationship that his company desperately needed. Brad was confronting the consequences of his casual arrogance, realizing that words spoken in social settings could have professional ramifications. Maya, Robert said carefully, I want to be absolutely clear that those comments do not represent Morrison Development Group's position toward innovation or toward potential partners. We recognize that we have much to learn from companies like yours, and we're committed to approaching this partnership with the respect and professionalism it deserves. It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get, and it was sufficient for business purposes. Robert Morrison was publicly acknowledging that his family had been wrong, that their assessment of both me and the tech industry had been based on prejudice rather than knowledge. In that case, I said, I think we can move forward. Sarah will send you our standard partnership agreement, along with a detailed implementation timeline. The initial phase will involve a comprehensive analysis of your current operations, followed by a customized platform deployment and staff training program. The relief on Robert Morrison's face was palpable. His company would get the technological upgrade they needed, and he would avoid the humiliation of being rejected by the woman his family had insulted. It was a victory for everyone involved, but it came with the understanding that the personal relationship between our families had been permanently altered. As the Morrison Development Group team prepared to leave, Brad finally spoke directly to me for the first time since the awards ceremony. Maya, I want you to know that I understand how inappropriate my comments were last weekend. I made assumptions based on ignorance, and I said things that were unfair and hurtful. I hope we can work together professionally despite my personal failure. It was a more genuine apology than I had expected from Brad, and I found myself respecting his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes directly rather than hiding behind corporate politeness. I appreciate that, Brad. We all make mistakes. The measure of character is how we respond when we realize we've been wrong. The following weeks brought a series of developments that illustrated how dramatically the situation had changed for everyone involved. The Morrison Development Group partnership proceeded smoothly, with their team embracing our technology platform with an enthusiasm that suggested they understood exactly how much they needed our help. Robert Morrison proved to be a quick learner and an engaged client, asking thoughtful questions and implementing our recommendations with impressive efficiency, but it was the personal ramifications that proved most complex and emotionally challenging. Jessica had been calling me regularly since the awards ceremony, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly desperate as I continued to not return her call. Finally, she appeared at my office building one Thursday evening, waiting in the lobby with the persistence of someone who had run out of other options. Maya, please, she said when I emerged from the elevator, her eyes red with exhaustion and stress. I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be, but I can't fix this if you won't talk to me. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone who was genuinely suffering. The polished, confident woman who had stood silent while her in-laws dismantled my character had been replaced by someone who looked lost and uncertain, someone who was beginning to understand the true cost of her choices. Jess, walking isn't going to fix this, I said gently. This isn't about one bad evening or a few unfortunate comments. This is about 3 years of choosing them over family, of letting their values replace your own. I know, she whispered, I know, and I hate what I became. I hate that I let them convince me that their way of seeing the world was right, that success and worth could be measured by the things they value. We walked to a coffee shop a few blocks from my office, one of the small independent places that had sprung up in downtown Austin as the city's character evolved to embrace both innovation and authenticity. Jessica ordered herbal tea with shaking hands, and I could see that the stress of the past few weeks had taken a genuine toll on her. "Tell me what's been happening at home," I said, settling into a chair across from her. Jessica laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Home. That's part of the problem, isn't it?" I started thinking of their house as home instead of the place where I grew up with you and Mom and Dad. She told me about the aftermath of the awards ceremony, about the conversations and arguments that had consumed the Morrison household for the past 3 weeks. Patricia had been furious, not just about the humiliation, but about the implications for the family's social standing. She had spent years cultivating relationships with Austin's elite, and the story of their treatment of me had become widespread enough to damage her reputation in the circles she valued most. "She keeps saying that you deliberately deceived us, that you should have told us who you really were from the beginning," Jessica said. "She can't accept that she was wrong about you, so she's trying to make it your fault for not correcting her assumption." Brad, according to Jessica, had been more introspective about the situation. The professional consequences of his dismissive comments about the tech industry had been immediate and painful, with several business connections, making it clear that his attitude toward innovation was outdated and counterproductive. "He's actually been reading about artificial intelligence and trying to understand what your company does," Jessica said with a rueful smile. "It's probably the first time in his life that he's had to admit he was completely wrong about something important." But it was Robert Morrison's reaction that surprised me most. According to Jessica, the patriarch of the family had been conducting his own investigation into my background and Nexus Technologies' impact on the Austin business community. He found out that 3 of their biggest competitors are already using your platform, and that Morrison Development Group was falling behind because they were too proud to embrace new technology. He told Patricia that if they had taken 5 minutes to actually get to know you instead of making assumptions, they might have been ahead of the curve instead of scrambling to catch up. The conversation continued for over 2 hours, with Jessica gradually revealing the depth of her regret and the extent to which the Morrison family's influence had changed her fundamental value. She had become someone she didn't recognize, someone who measured worth by external markers rather than character and achievement. "Maya, I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she said finally. "I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't undo 3 years of choosing them over you. But I want you to know that I see clearly now. I see what I lost when I stopped being proud of who we are and where we came from." I studied my sister's face, seeing genuine remorse but also the deeper question of whether understanding her mistakes would translate into lasting change. The Morrison family had shaped her values for 3 years, and those influences didn't disappear overnight. "Jess, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," she nodded, preparing herself for whatever difficult question was coming. "If I had never won that award, if you had never learned about Nexus Technologies, would you still be sitting here apologizing, or would you still be comfortable with their assessment of my life and choices?" Jessica was quiet for a long time, clearly wrestling with the implications of the question. It was the heart of the matter, the difference between being sorry for the consequences of her behavior and being sorry for the behavior itself. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Want to say yes. I want to believe that I would have eventually realized how wrong they were. But I honestly don't know, and that terrifies me about who I became." It was the most honest thing she had said, and paradoxically, it gave me more hope for our relationship than any of her apologies had. "The question isn't whether you would have figured it out eventually," I said. "The question is what you're going to do now that you know the truth." Over the following months, Jessica began the difficult process of rebuilding her sense of self and her relationship with our family. She started by setting boundaries with the Morrison family, making it clear that she would no longer tolerate dismissive comments about our parents or our background. She began spending more time with our mother and father, reconnecting with the values and perspectives that had shaped our childhood. Most significantly, she started working again. Jessica had always been brilliant with numbers and analysis, and she found a position with a nonprofit organization that helped small businesses with financial planning and development. It was meaningful work that aligned with her values, and it gave her a sense of purpose that had been missing during her years as a Morrison family wife. The changes weren't always easy or smooth. There were arguments with Brad about her new priorities, tensions with Patricia about her reduced availability for social obligations, and moments when the comfort of her old life seemed more appealing than the challenges of rediscovering herself. But gradually I began to see glimpses of the sister I had once known, the woman who believed that success meant building something valuable rather than inheriting it, who measured worth by character and achievement rather than social status and material possession. The Morrison family's adjustment to their new reality proved equally complex. Patricia never fully accepted responsibility for her treatment of me, instead developing a narrative in which the misunderstanding had been mutual and unfortunate, but ultimately beneficial for everyone involved. She began introducing me at social events as Jessica's incredibly successful sister, as if she had always been proud of my achievement. Robert Morrison proved more adaptable, throwing himself into learning about technology and innovation with the thoroughness that had made him successful in traditional real estate development. The partnership between Morrison Development Group and Nexus Technologies became a case study in successful technology adoption, with their projects becoming more efficient and profitable as they embraced AI-driven optimization. Brad's evolution was perhaps the most dramatic. The realization that his dismissive attitude toward innovation had nearly cost his family's company a crucial competitive advantage led him to enroll in executive education programs focused on technology and entrepreneurship. He began attending Austin's tech meetups and startup events, genuinely trying to understand the industry he had previously mocked. As for me, the months following the awards ceremony brought opportunities and challenges that I couldn't have anticipated. Nexus Technologies continued to grow rapidly, expanding into new markets and developing partnerships with major development firms across the Southwest. The publicity from the awards ceremony and the subsequent media coverage had elevated our profile significantly, bringing both investment opportunities and client inquiries that accelerated our growth beyond my most optimistic projection. But the personal revelations had been equally transformative. I had learned that hiding my success, while initially protective, had created its own problems. The decision to maintain a low profile had allowed misconceptions and prejudices to flourish unchallenged, ultimately leading to the very family tensions I had been trying to avoid. More importantly, I had learned that authenticity required courage. It was easier to let people underestimate me than to risk the complications that came with being seen clearly, but those complications were often worth navigating for the sake of genuine relationships and mutual respect. The relationship between Jessica and me continued to evolve slowly and carefully. We began having regular coffee meetings, conversations that gradually moved beyond apologies and recriminations to discussions of our current lives and future goals. She told me about her nonprofit work and her rediscovered passion for helping people achieve financial stability. I shared stories about Nexus Technologies' latest projects and the challenges of scaling a rapidly growing company. It wasn't the easy intimacy we had shared in our 20s, but it was real and honest in ways that our relationship hadn't been for years. Jessica was working to rebuild not just our relationship but her own sense of identity and value. It was difficult work that required constant vigilance against the comfortable prejudices and assumptions she had adopted during her years in the Morrison orbit. 1 year after the awards ceremony, Nexus Technologies hosted its first annual conference on innovation in commercial development. The event brought together developers, architects, city planners, and technology experts from across the country to discuss the future of sustainable urban growth. The Morrison family attended as valued clients and partners, a development that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Robert Morrison gave a presentation about traditional development companies' successful adoption of AI technology, using his own company's transformation as a case study. Brad participated in a panel discussion about bridging the gap between established industries and emerging technology, but it was Jessica's presence that meant the most to me. She attended not as a Morrison family spouse, but as Maya Chen's sister, someone who was proud of what I had built and eager to understand the work that had become my passion. During the lunch break, we stood together on the conference center's outdoor terrace, looking out at the Austin skyline that had grown and changed so dramatically in recent years. "Maya," Jessica said quietly, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you, not just because of Nexus Technologies or the business success, but because of who you are and how you've handled everything that happened." "Thanks, Jess. That means more to me than you probably realize. I also want you to know that I'm proud of who I'm becoming again. It's been hard work, figuring out who I really am, underneath all the expectations and assumptions I adopted. But I'm getting there. I looked at my sister, seeing someone who was genuinely working to rebuild herself from the ground up, someone who was choosing authenticity over comfort even when that choice was difficult and uncertain. You know what I've learned through all of this? Success isn't really about the money, or the recognition, or even the impact you have on your industry. It's about being able to look at yourself honestly, and like what you see. Jessica nodded, understanding the deeper truth in those words. We had both learned that the most important achievements were often the most personal ones. The courage to be authentic, the strength to admit mistakes, the wisdom to choose values over convenience. The Austin skyline stretched out before us, a mix of gleaming new towers and established landmarks that represented the city's ability to honor its past while embracing its future. It was a fitting metaphor for what we had all been through, the challenge of growth and change, the difficulty of maintaining identity while adapting to new realities, the possibility of becoming something better without losing what had always been valuable. Nexus Technologies continued to thrive and expand, but its success felt different now that it existed in the full light of truth rather than hidden behind careful misdirection. The company had become not just a business achievement, but a statement about the power of innovation, persistence, and authentic leadership. The Morrison family had learned to adapt to a world where their assumptions about success and worth had been challenged and found wanting. It had been a difficult education, but ultimately a valuable one that made them more thoughtful, more humble, and more open to possibilities they had previously dismissed. And Jessica and I had begun the slow work of rebuilding a relationship based on mutual respect and shared values, rather than family obligation and social expectation. It wasn't the same relationship we had shared in our youth, but it was honest and genuine in ways that promised genuine healing and growth. As the conference resumed and we returned to our respective responsibilities, I reflected on the journey that had brought us all to this point. It had begun with a moment of public humiliation, a family dinner where assumptions and prejudices had been laid bare in the most painful way possible, but it had led to revelations and growth that wouldn't have been possible without that initial crisis. Sometimes the most important truths emerged only when comfortable lies became impossible to maintain. Sometimes the most valuable relationships were the ones that survived the test of complete honesty. And sometimes the most meaningful success was measured not by external recognition, but by the courage to remain authentic in a world that often rewarded conformity over character. The awards ceremony revelation had changed everything for everyone involved, but in ways that ultimately made us all more genuine, more thoughtful, and more worthy of the respect we hoped to earn from others and ourselves. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office on the 20th floor of Austin's newest high-rise, painting the expanding city in shades of gold that reminded me why I had fallen in love with this place. Nexus Technologies now occupied 3 full floors of the building, a testament to growth that had exceeded even my most ambitious projections from those early days in my East Austin apartment. Sarah Kim knocked on my office door, now carrying the title of Chief Operating Officer and leading a team of 12 executives who managed our operations across 4 states. She entered with her characteristic efficiency, but there was something different in her expression today, a mixture of excitement and anticipation that suggested significant news. "Maya, I have some interesting developments to share," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, with a tablet full of what appeared to be financial reports and market analyses. "The quarterly numbers are in, and they're extraordinary even by our standards. Revenue is up 43% from last quarter, and our client retention rate has reached 97%. I leaned back in my chair, still sometimes amazed by the trajectory our company had taken. What had started as a solution to inefficiencies in commercial development had evolved into a comprehensive platform that was reshaping how businesses approached everything from site selection to environmental impact assessment. More importantly, Sarah continued, we've received 3 acquisition offers in the past month, 2 from major tech companies, and 1 from a consortium of development firms that wants to integrate our platform into their core operations. The acquisition offers weren't surprising. Nexus Technologies had become the gold standard for AI-driven commercial optimization, and our success had attracted attention from companies looking to either compete with us or absorb us. But the decision about whether to sell or continue growing independently was more complex than simple financial calculations. "What are your thoughts on the offers?" I asked, curious about Sarah's perspective. She had been with the company long enough to understand both its potential and the challenges of continued rapid expansion. Financially, they're all substantial. The largest offer would make every employee wealthy and provide you with more capital than you could spend in several lifetimes, she said with a slight smile. But I keep thinking about what you said when we first started working together, about building something that creates lasting value rather than just generating profit. It was a conversation I'd been having with myself for weeks. The acquisition offers represented financial security beyond anything I'd imagined when I first started coding in my apartment, but they also represented the end of the independent company I'd built according to my own values and vision. There's something else, Sarah said, her tone shifting to something more personal. Jessica called this morning. She wanted to know if you'd be available for lunch today. She said she had something important to discuss. My relationship with Jessica had continued to evolve over the past 3 years, moving from careful reconciliation to genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared value. She had thrived in her work with the nonprofit sector, eventually starting her own organization that provided financial literacy and business development services to underserved communities. Her marriage to Brad had survived, but it had been fundamentally transformed by their willingness to confront the assumptions and prejudices that had nearly destroyed their relationships with people they claimed to care about. Tell her I'll meet her at Luna Coffee at 1 o'clock, I said, naming the same South First establishment where I'd designed my first professional logo years ago. It seemed fitting to return to that place for what Jessica had described as an important conversation. The morning passed quickly with the usual array of strategic decisions and operational challenges that came with running a rapidly growing company. We were preparing to launch our platform in Colorado and Arizona, partnerships that would require careful attention to regional regulations and market conditions. The engineering team was finalizing updates to our predictive algorithms that would improve accuracy by an additional 8%, a seemingly small improvement that would translate to millions of dollars in savings for our client. At noon, I drove through the Austin traffic that had become increasingly congested as the city's population continued to boom. The East Austin neighborhood where I'd lived during Nexus Technologies' early days had been transformed by gentrification, with luxury condos and upscale restaurants replacing the modest apartments and dive bars that had given the area its character. Progress always came with trade-offs, and watching my old neighborhood change reminded me of the responsibility that came with success in a rapidly evolving city. Luna Coffee had survived the neighborhood's transformation, adapting to serve both longtime residents and newcomers, while maintaining the authentic atmosphere that had made it special. I found Jessica already seated at a corner table, looking more confident and self-assured than she had in years. Her work with financial literacy had given her a sense of purpose that radiated from her posture and expression, and I felt a familiar surge of pride in who my sister had become. Maya, thank you for making time, she said as I settled into the chair across from her. I know how busy things have gotten for you. Never too busy for family, I replied, meaning it completely. The years of distance and misunderstanding had taught me the value of prioritizing relationships that mattered over professional obligations that could always wait. Jessica's expression grew serious, and I could see that she was preparing to share something significant. I wanted to talk to you about Mom and Dad's anniversary party next month. It's their 40th anniversary, and I've been thinking about how we should celebrate it. Our parents had been married for 39 years, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and unwavering support for each other's dreams and ambitions. Their anniversary had always been a family celebration, but this milestone felt particularly meaningful given everything our family had been through in recent years. I was thinking we could host something at the house, Jessica continued, but then I realized that wouldn't really honor who they are or what they've accomplished. They built their lives around education, community service, and helping other people achieve their potential. A fancy party doesn't reflect those values. I nodded, understanding where this conversation was heading. David and Linda Chen had never been impressed by luxury or status displays, finding meaning, instead, in the work they did, and the people they helped along the way. What did you have in mind? I asked. Jessica's face lit up with enthusiasm. I want to establish a scholarship fund in their honor, something that helps first-generation college students study engineering and business, particularly students from immigrant families who are trying to build something new in this country. The idea was perfect, so completely aligned with our parents' values that I wondered why we hadn't thought of it sooner. David Chen had spent 40 years helping students discover their potential in engineering, while Linda Chen had built a small but successful accounting practice that specialized in helping immigrant entrepreneurs navigate the financial complexities of starting businesses in America. I love it, I said immediately. What kind of funding are you thinking about? That's where I was hoping you might be willing to help, Jessica said, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty. My nonprofit work has given me some experience with scholarship administration, but the kind of endowment that would make a real difference requires more capital than I can provide. I leaned forward, already imagining the possibility. Jess, what if we made this bigger than just a scholarship fund? What if we created an entire program that combines education with mentorship and business development opportunities? Jessica's eyes widened as she considered the implication. You mean like a comprehensive support system for first-generation entrepreneurs? We could partner with UT and other universities to identify promising students, provide full scholarships for their education, connect them with mentors in their chosen fields, and even offer seed funding for their startup ideas after graduation. The conversation continued for over an hour, as we developed the concept into something that could genuinely transform lives and opportunities for the kind of students our parents had always been passionate about helping. The Chen Family Foundation would become a comprehensive program that addressed not just the financial barriers to education, but the networking and mentorship gaps that often prevented talented students from achieving their full potential. Maya, this is incredible, Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. This is exactly the kind of legacy Mom and Dad would want. They've spent their entire careers helping people build better lives, and this would allow that work to continue for generations. We'll need to structure it carefully, I said, already thinking about the legal and administrative requirements. But I think we could launch with an initial endowment of $10 million, enough to support 20 full scholarships per year, plus the mentorship and business development components. Jessica stared at me across the table, clearly processing the magnitude of what I was proposing. $10 million was more money than our family had ever imagined having access to, but it represented a relatively small percentage of my net worth following Nexus Technologies' explosive growth. Are you serious about that number? She asked quietly. Completely serious. And I think we should make it clear that this is a family foundation, not just something I'm funding independently. Your experience with nonprofit administration and community outreach is just as valuable as the financial resource. As we finished our coffee and began planning the logistics of announcing the foundation at our parents' anniversary celebration, I reflected on how different this conversation was from the interactions Jessica and I had shared just a few years earlier. The sister who had once been embarrassed by my unconventional career path was now eager to partner with me on a project that would extend our family's values into the next generation. The drive back to downtown Austin gave me time to think about the broader implications of what we were planning. The Chen Family Foundation would be my first major philanthropic initiative, a way of using the success of Nexus Technologies to create opportunities for others who faced the same challenges I had encountered as a young entrepreneur from a non-traditional background. Back at the office, I called an emergency meeting with Sarah and our legal team to begin developing the foundation's structure and operational framework. The timeline was ambitious, with less than a month to create a comprehensive program that could be announced at our parents' anniversary celebration, but the urgency felt appropriate for something this meaningful. Maya, this is an incredible initiative, said our head of legal affairs, a brilliant attorney named Rebecca Torres, who had joined Nexus Technologies after working with several major tech companies in Silicon Valley. The tax implications are favorable, and the partnership opportunities with universities should be straightforward to negotiate. Over the following weeks, the foundation development consumed much of my attention outside of normal business operations. We established partnerships with UT Austin, Rice University, and Texas A&M to identify eligible students and provide academic support. We created a mentorship network that included successful entrepreneurs, engineers, and business leaders who were committed to providing guidance and networking opportunities. Most importantly, we designed the program to address the specific challenges that first-generation students from immigrant families often faced, language barriers, cultural navigation, financial literacy, and access to the kind of informal networks that facilitated career advancement. The anniversary celebration took place on a perfect October evening at our parents' North Austin home, the same modest house where Jessica and I had grown up dreaming about our futures and planning how we would change the world. The guest list included family friends, former students, colleagues from the university and the local business community, and a carefully selected group of people who had been part of David and Linda Chen's journey over 4 decades of marriage and partnership. As the evening progressed, I found myself watching our parents interact with their guests, seeing how naturally they connected with people from all backgrounds and walks of life. David was deep in conversation with a former student who had become a successful environmental engineer, while Linda was sharing business advice with a young entrepreneur who had recently immigrated from Vietnam. When it came time for Jessica and me to make our presentation, the room fell quiet with the attention that such moments commanded. 40 years ago, I began, David and Linda Chen started a partnership based on shared values, the belief that education could transform lives, that hard work and integrity were the foundations of success, and that helping others achieve their potential was the most meaningful way to spend a career. Jessica continued the narrative. Over those 40 years, Dad has helped thousands of students discover their passion for engineering and innovation. Mom has guided hundreds of entrepreneurs through the challenges of building businesses and achieving financial stability. They've created a legacy of service and education that has touched more lives than they probably realize. I took over again. Tonight, we want to announce the creation of the Chen Family Foundation, a comprehensive program that will provide full scholarships, mentorship, and business development opportunities for first-generation college students from immigrant families who want to pursue careers in engineering and entrepreneurship. The room erupted in applause, but it was our parents' expressions that mattered most. David Chen's eyes filled with tears as he processed the implications of what we were announcing. Linda Chen looked back and forth between Jessica and me with a mixture of pride, surprise, and overwhelming emotion. The foundation will launch with an initial endowment of $15 million, Jessica announced, revealing the final number we had settled on after securing additional contributions from several family friends and business partners. It will support 30 full scholarships per year, along with mentorship programs, internship opportunities, and seed funding for student entrepreneurs. The celebration continued late into the evening with stories and memories that connected our family's past to the future we were now committed to building. Former students shared updates on their careers and families, longtime friends offered congratulations and support for the foundation, and new acquaintances expressed interest in contributing their time and expertise to the program. But the moment that meant the most to me came near the end of the evening when our parents pulled Jessica and me aside for a private conversation. "Girls," David said, his voice still thick with emotion, "this is the most meaningful gift anyone has ever given us. Not because of the money, but because it shows that you understand what we've tried to teach you about using success to create opportunities for others." Linda nodded, taking both of our hands in her. "When you were growing up, we worried sometimes that the world would convince you that success was about accumulating wealth or status. Tonight, you've shown us that you learned the more important lesson, that real success is about what you build for the next generation." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself standing in the backyard where Jessica and I had played as children, looking up at the stars that were still visible despite Austin's growing light pollution. The city had changed dramatically since our childhood, evolving from a quirky college town into a major tech hub, but the values our parents had instilled in us remained constant. Jessica joined me in the quiet backyard, both of us processing the significance of what we had just committed to building together. "Maya, I want you to know how grateful I am," she said quietly. "Not just for your financial contribution to the foundation, but for giving me the chance to be part of something this meaningful. 3 years ago, I had lost sight of who I really was and what mattered to me. Tonight feels like coming home to my real value. Jess, this foundation wouldn't work without your expertise and community connections. You've built relationships with exactly the organizations and institutions we need to partner with. This is truly a collaboration." As we stood together in the peaceful darkness, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. It had begun with a humiliating family dinner where assumptions and prejudices had been laid bare in the most painful way possible. but it had led to revelations and growth that had ultimately made us all more authentic, more thoughtful, and more committed to building something meaningful with the opportunities we had been given. The Chen Family Foundation would be my most important legacy, more significant than Nexus Technologies or any business success I might achieve in the future. It represented the values our parents had taught us, the lessons we had learned through conflict and reconciliation, and our commitment to ensuring that the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs would have better support and more opportunities than we had enjoyed. 3 weeks later, as I sat in my office reviewing the first applications for foundation scholarships, I received a call that would mark another significant transition in my life. One of the acquisition offers for Nexus Technologies had been increased substantially, with terms that would allow me to maintain operational control while providing the capital and resources needed for national expansion. The decision was no longer difficult. With the foundation established and a clear sense of how I wanted to use my success to create opportunities for others, selling a majority stake in Nexus Technologies felt like the natural next step. It would provide financial security for all of our employees, resources for continued innovation, and the flexibility to focus more attention on philanthropic initiatives. Sarah Kim was thrilled when I shared the news with her, both about the acquisition and about my decision to transition into a more advisory role that would allow greater focus on the foundation. "Maya, this feels like the perfect evolution," she said during our meeting to discuss the transition timeline. "You built Nexus Technologies to solve problems and create value. Now you're scaling that impact to help others build their own solutions and create their own value." As I looked out at the Austin skyline from my 20th floor office, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought me to this point. The award ceremony revelation had been a catalyst for truth and growth that none of us could have anticipated. It had forced difficult conversations, challenged comfortable assumptions, and ultimately led to stronger, more authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than social expectations. The Morrison family had learned to question their prejudices and embrace innovation. Jessica had rediscovered her true values and built a meaningful career around them. Our parents had seen their life's work honored and extended through a foundation that would outlast any individual achievement. And I had learned that the most important success was measured not by recognition or wealth, but by the courage to remain authentic and the wisdom to use whatever advantages you gained to lift others along the way. The story that had begun with humiliation and misunderstanding had evolved into something far more meaningful, a family reunited around shared values, a community strengthened by authentic relationships, and a foundation built to ensure that the next generation of dreamers and innovators would have better opportunities to turn their visions into reality. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.